They say music feeds the soul and food feeds the heart. So please join us for season 2 of Brunch with a Black Man, where we sit down with black men from across the world who talk about their experiences with mental health, mental wellness, and how they are taking on their own mental health journey. We sit down over brunch to break it down. Make sure you join us for season 2 of Brunch with a Black Man. Hello and welcome to another edition of Brunch with the Black Man. I'm your host, Miracle Jones, and today we are here with the lovely, amazing community organizer and health advocate, Daryl. Daryl, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
So far, so good. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into your work, we want to know a little bit more about you. So can you just talk a little bit about how you grew up and where you grew up here in New York?
I grew up here in New York, originally in the Bronx,
Mm-hmm.
and then Upper West Side, uptown, and that's about it. As far as everything else, went to a lot of different schools, public, private, Catholic, um, and then that was like the New York experience, and I went away for high school.
Okay, you said the New York experience, you're moving around. What were some of the things that you remember about like your life at that time?
Damn, which time? Youth was just like kind of just. I remember school. I have a group of four sisters. Um, no fathers in the house, but my mom was a real strong character. My sisters were all older, so I guess that was like by about 9 years or more. So I always had like some kind of supervision or like somebody to look after what I was doing. I don't know. I remember bouncing from a lot of different schools, which was good. Got different kinds of groups of friends and like different experiences. That's about it. I can't complain, but I can't say it was like it wasn't different strokes, but it also wasn't good times.
Oh, thank you so much. I see you said different strokes and things that are like happening. When you went away to high school, what was
Mhm.
that like for you?
That was good at first. It was a boarding school, and so got a scholarship. Thank you, appreciate that. So I got a scholarship on the way, and it was like a campus, trees, food, sports. So that was like a different environment, definitely than where I was at here in the city. So it was like a whole new world. I got tired of it probably after like the second year. Um, when I first moved away there, my sister was battling AIDS at the time, so that kind of was like I don't know, it was like a escape to get away to school, but at the same time coming home and everything was kind of like in flux or like I don't know, very touchy, so to speak. And I think she passed my 10th grade year. So it was just kind of, I think, I probably didn't realize what I was going through, depression or going through some other things at the time, um, and just really trying to find a footing. But, you know, we pushed through, and I think the family held each other together, and that was about it.
And so, as you're grieving the loss of your sister, is
Mm-hmm.
there anyone you're able to turn to talk to you about like your mental health, how to grieve, like how to engage and process your emotions?
I mean, I don't think at that time it wasn't offered, and also wasn't that time period where everyone was talking about it, so AIDS was very taboo at the time, um, you know, so it wasn't really like a full disclosure to talk to people about it. It wasn't something I was sharing too much, and I think everybody in the family was dealing with it a certain way. So I can't really say I had an outlet or some kind of confidant. I think I had a couple of friends that maybe I expressed that too, like after like a year or so.
And so, like, you're holding, that secret with you.
Mm-hmm.
How was the last couple of years of school for you
Man, so I would say at that time period it was a little rocky, and then last 2 years was, I think, I probably say I was in some kind of depression for about 10 years, but not really knowing what it was.
then?
It's just a matter of like you just feel a certain way, and you just kind of ignore certain things. But um, Yeah, I mean, I can't really say that it was great, but I think there was just ways that I was dealing with it, which was like trying to escape through friends or trying to escape through alcohol, drugs, any kind of like other means, or also through sports and regular teenage life.
And so you're talking about finding like self medication,
Hmm.
like as a young person. What was that like for you to feel like that was like your escape and that's what you needed to be able to process and maintain?
Um, I think at the time it was just like you classify it as fun, you classify it as experience, um, recreation, you know. But I think it's just the aftermath that you got to deal with, which is the you're still in that place. You might notice different things happen, like grades or performance in other areas, anger. So you might see that in a lot of different ways, but no one's really paying attention to it at that time. They're probably just putting it as part of your character.
And so you go away for this like boarding school, and then
Hmm.
that ends.
Hmm.
What do you do now?
Then I went to college.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Emory in Atlanta, um, and that was different because I never even visited until I got there. So I think when I got there, my sister came with me. My mother came. My mother had just had like a Bell's palsy attack, so it was just like, figure it out. I think from day one, um, it was kind of like just keep going with the flow, And then I think the first day there, I was at a bar, because my roommate at the time, his brother-in-law, his future brother-in-law was already working there. So the first night we were there, we were at a bar. But I think it was just putting it together. It seemed easy at first. Then I think it just got a little bit more difficult.
And so Atlanta is like a say is a different place.
Yeah.
You know, there is access, there's clubs, there's going out, there's still school, but the vibe is a little bit different. Like how did you adjust to like being in a different place in the South and how did it compare to like your circle in New York at the time?
So going to the South, it was different because, I didn't really have any reference for the school. Um, and you get there, and you got the southern part, but then you also have this heavy New York, like northeast part. So Emory's like not really a southern school. It's not like a Tulane. It's not like Southern or, um, but you have a mix of people. So there was a lot more people from the northeast. But then when you leave campus and you go to other things, then it's like okay, now you're in the South. And I think the adjustment was pretty easy, except for like I'm used to transportation. I'm used to being able to move around through a subway, bus, cab, and there you kind of locked in. So that was kind of like, oh man, we was like, bored. I remember one time we even just came to New York on a whim, like drove up on a Saturday night. Um, was just here for a day, just to get out of there.
And so you're in college, you still have the connection to self medication.
Yeah.
And how are you now then processing everything? You're still grieving the loss of your sister. Your
Hmm.
mom is going through her medical crises.
Hmm.
You're trying to maintain your grades, and then you're also trying to still find yourself as a young person. So how is that going for you?
That was, hmm, I think that how was it going for me? It was just like, once again, make it up day by day. Still not talking about your issues. Still not talking about my issues. Um, but relying on friends to just like, I think everybody at that time is going through something. They're definitely going through something they're not talking about. I don't think, until I would say right until maybe like 26, realizing like, okay, you got to get a grip on things, slow down, pay attention. What have you been going through? And then kind of taking it into more of like an independent like angle. Everything then was more like, oh, you could just go with the flow. And then I think then it was like, okay, what have I been doing? Now actually I got to make plans for like more than a day ahead, but like a future. You know, what do I want to get into? What's a passion? What am I about?
I need to. And you said at 26 you kind of had to change. What happened at 26 for you?
26. I don't even know. What happened at 26? I would say started a company with an older friend, an associate. You know, we were working in the music business at the time. And then we also got into video production and things like that. So I think that was just like, okay, taking that more seriously, trying to figure out your own way, how to create your own company, your own future. And, you know, we were able to rely on each other in a good way. So his name was Ray, and we actually had a good bond. Another brother, Forte, we actually had a good bond working through music. So it was kind of like, oh, we're focused as a group on trying to, you know, work together and do some different things. So um, I think that was a change. Also got my jaw broken, got jumped and got my jaw broken. So that was like some time to sit back and think, how did that happen? How was I not paying attention? And, you know, need to have different protocol for my safety and for like my surroundings.
And so you were someone who was already dealing with self medication.
Mm-hmm.
You get an injury,
Mm-hmm.
you have introductions to like pain medication
Mm-hmm.
and different things. So how was that journey of like trying to like maintain, plan for the future, but also dealing with unresolved like mental health issues?
Um, so I think at that time it was really not about, you know, it was just taking it still, processing it. You know, I think everybody, you know, I don't think anybody's life is crazier than the next. You know, it's a matter how you what's your perspective on it. You know, it's everything is relative. So at that time, I was just processing it. Okay, that's what happened. Let's just keep moving. Um, Not until really understanding a little bit later about like mental health, um, some kind of like focus on self discovery, do you start realizing the problems you were having or the problems you are having? You know, so it's like you have to get a completely outside of your body perspective to come back and look at yourself and say, okay, damn, okay, you're probably going through this, you're going through that. Maybe you should work on this. You know, so work on listening, work on losing a little bit of your ego, acknowledging, you know, the support that you have around you without trying to like block it. You know, certain people that you probably have been blocking out of your life, and you might want to actually take them in. So I think all of that was like starting to be a process. You know, realizing that a family hadn't been talking as much, and that we were here to support each other. But I think now was more so reach out for some kind of support, also reach out to check in.
And so like as you're like going through all these things, like the real world is happening. The real world is like moving and mobilizing. We know the 80s like brought the crack era
Yeah.
happening, and there was like drugs and violence. But then we also, you know, you laugh a little bit.
No. No. Okay.
Go ahead.
No. Drugs, violence, money.
Money, that's a life. But then we're also starting to see people turn to harder drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what was that like for you to like watch that change go through?
Well, I would say like I was fortunate to see like black community, black love before the crack era. So, you know, prior to that, you could still be in the hood and you could like have a neighbor with their door unlocked, knock on it for something to borrow something, or I remember people having house parties and things like that, the door is open. I would say after 87, that all changed. 88, that all changed to me in my perspective. So now I think even today you still have youth that just look at the dysfunction of the community without having to have had an experience where community was community, and it all wasn't just, you know, riddled with poverty and substance abuse, you know, and in a different way that it was all of a sudden your neighbor, your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your sister, all of a sudden was on crack, or smoking crack, or was somehow in the repercussions of it through jail or through substance abuse. And that was like interesting, just to see people that you never would have thought would just take a left turn, um, and that was what's happening. And then also to see that like the stigmatization of people that were in your families, in your community, that all of a sudden you wanted to avoid, or you just started having a low perspective of them. And then at the same time, also seeing like mothers, fathers, grandparents willing to like be a part of sending their relatives to jail, and seeing it as a solution, and which is, crazy when when you look back to it, like us thinking that, or not us, let me not say us, not me at the time, but our community seeing it as like the solution to this problem was incarceration, um, and, giving up on people.
And one of the things that you have tried to do is not give up on people. You try to create like avenues
Mm-hmm.
to engage, to bring people in so they can express their art, do different things. Why was that so important to you?
Mm-hmm. Pardon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, wasn't important. It still is important. When did I become aware of it? I would say probably through working with music, working with video art. Um, the music industry has like this big, I would say, ego is like currency. It's only besides like finance. I can only think of like those two where they promote ego as like a positive thing, a kind of currency or a persona that's acceptable. So kind of getting fed up with that at a certain point, you start to check in. And then I think after losing a few friends, so starting the ASAP Foundation with a mother, Tatiana Paulino, who lost her son, ASAP Mims, kind of being brought into it from that angle where, having dinners with her and talking and just going through that mourning process, as well as he was a colleague and associate of mine. So still going through that mourning process, but seeing how it was impacting her, she was like, hey, what can we do, or can you help me do something so that another mother or family doesn't go through exactly what I'm going through? And this feeling, this sense of loss. So I'm like, okay, cool, I can try, you know, let's figure it out. And then take it step by step from like having dinners to having meetings in a community room, to now trying to figure out, hey, how can we have an event in the neighborhood, but just really start talking about different perspectives that people had on substance use, substance misuse, um, and how do we keep people safe? So I think through time, um, it was trying to find our footing, also not trying to reinvent the wheel. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you want to figure out how you can add on. There are people that have been doing this kind of work, and you want to see what they're doing and how you can add on to it. I got a chance to meet Dr. Carl Hart. We had a meeting. Um, he's a colleague. He's not a colleague yet, but he's got colleagues in the room. We're sitting there, and we started talking about drug use, and I think he just kept it really blunt. Because don't know who's in the room, but it was like, oh, this, you're feeling stigmatized, and so you start, putting up this little wall. So he's just like, how about you just say you fucking use drugs, and that you have experience using drugs, and if you don't have any experience, then you shouldn't be doing any of this work. And so I was just like, okay, it was like a slap, but a good slap to wake you up.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, cool. All right, so you know what? That's like a boulder off my back. Okay, so I am ready for this. And then I think what we want to do is create something that would speak to the people that we lost. Not necessarily focusing on abstinence, not focusing on, a 12-year-old not smoking weed or drinking a beer, but focusing on people living through their addiction or through their substance use and trying to keep people alive. So at the end of the day, we knew that our focus was to like, what can we do to prevent overdoses? What can we do to prevent fatal overdoses? And what kind of communication or what other messages can we amplify in that area and that niche, because that would now be ours. That would be ours to be working on. That's our lane to work on. And then who is in this lane doing this work, and how are they doing it? How can we amplify their message? How can we translate it for this demographic? And then, build from there. So, and then at the same time, just not deal with crises, thinking about, oh, you're only dealing with addiction and substance abuse. But let's talk about how to properly, use drugs and safely use drugs, if that's the case. And, also to work with the community to do things such as like clothing drives, holiday toy drives, back to school events, because those things mean a lot to um, dealing with some of the issues and the hurdles that kids and families have, without just talking about addiction and things like that.
So you're doing a lot of the work, and when people think about substance use disorder, they really do not understand it. I was at a program one time, and they said, the majority of people who use drugs aren't even addicted to it. It's people who may try it here or there, but we have this idea that the only time people are battling substance use disorder is when they're in the throes of the addiction that they cannot control. From the work that you are doing, what are some of the things that you want people to know about the folks who use drugs, who need drugs, or even depend on drugs?
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge that everybody's using drugs. Whether it's sugar, nicotine, alcohol, people taking pain medication. I doubt if there's a person in this room that's not using drugs, in some form. And so the idea is that everybody's dealing with something that's affecting their mood, that's affecting their body, something that they like, that is a food or something that they're ingesting in some way. So I think that's the first fundamental thing I deal with. So therefore, I'm not stigmatizing you for what you're doing. I'm not saying, I think that's what a lot of people do is, hey, what drug I'm doing is okay, but the drugs you're doing is not okay. And then we start to judge each other's use from there. I think the idea is with everything else from sugar to cocaine to marijuana, you want to use it in moderation. Self-medication, even if you use it every day, you want to actually be able to check in and say, okay, what is my amount? Is it getting more? Is it getting less? Is it staying the same? How's my performance in life? And so I think, overall, people have that perspective, usually because they don't have any knowledge of the drugs that they don't do. So we will think that, oh, that's insane that they're doing that, because you've never done it. Or that's insane that they're doing it, but maybe they only do it once a month. Maybe you drink 8 cups of coffee a day. So there's a judgment factor I think that we have to remove in general to actually start having empathy and sympathy for other people and being able to tap into them and work with them. When we get to substance use disorder, I think what we're actually getting to is people having other trauma that is constantly triggering or occasionally triggering, and then they're self-medicating. Now, how deep that trauma is according to how much you might actually now start engaging in your self-medication and your recreational to habitual drug use. And so from there, we got to check in. So if you see somebody and they're just drunk, off the rails, you want to say, hey, what's going on? And then you want to, but alcohol is a little bit more acceptable. It's like, oh, you went on a bender, drunk, okay. But if you see somebody in that state, it's usually a red flag that something else is going on. So when we start talking about substance use disorder, we have to actually start thinking about what other trauma is behind that. What caused that? Try and tap into that if you're trying to help, if the person wants help. But I think, the key is never to say that person's lost or that's on them. You want to figure out, hey, how can I help them maybe even just take a break so that they can get focused on what might be going on. But you do want to express the care, because hopefully you do care, or else you shouldn't be asking that question.
Yeah, and you talk about like doing this work and the loss that you experienced that led to this work. So how do you, as someone who is oftentimes seeing people at their best, even worst parts of their life, how do you check in with yourself? Like, what is your own like Daryl check-in process?
Checking for what?
This is what's going on. Like, how do you manage like dealing with all this trauma, all this pain for the work that you do? Like, how do you check in with yourself to make sure that you're doing okay?
I think with okay, I think there's a perspective that I can look at it as I'm dealing with all this trauma, right? Or I could look at it and say, okay, I'm dealing with all of this like potential greatness, or like, oh, I could be tapping in and looking at it as like I'm dealing with somebody that's about to go through a healing process. So it's like changing the perspective to look at it on the bright side, um, and not, and mind you, there is obviously some absorption of like where you're at and what you're dealing with. But I think that's the same. If I look at it as work, it's the same as if I worked in like picking up garbage, doing sanitation, or if I was doing finance. That's work. But now the care part is where I get to have an upside, and I get to look at, um, kind of like collaboration, sharing. I'm looking at it in that way, so I'm not dragged down. And also, you don't want to really sponge up people's trauma. You want to let them deal with it, and you might not even want to get too far into it. You might want to refer them to people that are more capable of helping in that process. So I would say a lot of this work that we're doing with substance use is really, harm reduction overall. And then harm reduction also involves just like getting people aware, but I think it's a wraparound. You want to actually work with other people, other organizations that can assist people when they're in these situations. So, you know, substance use and substance abuse can be caused by food insecurity, can be caused by financial insecurity, can be, so these other things you want to be able to refer people to other solutions besides just dealing with drug use. Dealing with substance use, you want to be like, okay, cool, do you have your ID? Can you go get support here? Can you get SNAP? Can you get this? Are you housed? People are like, oh my God, these people are doing so much meth. They're meth heads, that's their fault. But maybe that keeps them safe while they're unhoused, because being up at night, or we want to be up at night to be aware of your surroundings. So certain substances may keep people in a certain loop, but we're not realizing that the substance use might be a safety valve for them. So um, once again, I'm just trying to lose the judgment and stop looking at it. For me, perspective is like, okay, I'm dealing with someone in their trauma, when I'm like, okay, I'm really dealing with somebody in their healing. And then, well, what do I have as a common thread? What do I have as a reference? To understand where they're at, maybe, or to relate to where they're at. And then, okay, not let me make an assumption about what they're dealing with. Let me ask them specifically, because we may think somebody's substance use disorder is the worst thing going on, but that might be like low on the scale. There could be so many other things, and you got to really check in with people as to like, what's that? What is that? So for me, my personal check-in is also to do the same thing with myself. Like, where am I at? What's going on? Am I getting to work? Am I getting up on time? How am I functioning in the space? Am I getting angry at people I'm working with? Are people getting angry at me? And then those are my red flags to check back in. If I'm actually experiencing some joys with people, then okay, I'm doing the right thing. I'm still in a good play.
And so, like, as you're doing like your check-in process and like setting these boundaries, you're making sure that people understand like how to check their supply, how to make sure that they're able to test, how to go for different like referrals. So you're building kind of like these villages of community. What has been to you the output of that work?
The output. I think the output for me is providing safety tools for people to be able to test their drugs. And then the other output is really, so the other output I would say is, working with youth. The output is really trying to create paths I think. For each, participant or youth member I work with, you know, I think that it's about finding a path that they can follow that they're comfortable with, and being able to help them continue on that path. I don't think it's about structuring anything for them. It's just giving them options and opportunities. With drug safety, from giving you a test kit, um, or a fentanyl test kit or a xylazine test kit, that's for you to find your path and your use to be able to, stay on that path. Hey, I want to constantly keep checking my drugs so that I can stay alive. I don't become an accidental overdose. So I think it's always about giving people options and alternatives, and not always thinking that you have the best option and alternative, because so you want to give a variety of things. So I think that's the output, and that's part of the working with other organizations in the ecosystem or in the community, is to be able to tap in and figure out what is our work together, how we have a common cause. So if you're working with a youth member, you want to actually be able to work with the school. You want to be able to work with maybe a counselor in the school. You want to be able to work with the youth, with the teacher that they most connect with. You want to find out what's going on in the home. So you want to be able to connect with a parent if that's possible. You might want to connect with a brother or sister if that's possible. And I think that same option is whether I'm working We Build the Block with youth participants, or if I'm working the ASAP Foundation and trying to work with people that are using substances the wrong way or the right way, and then figuring out, hey, how do we work together to keep promoting this and keep everybody in the know. It's like I'm not keeping you on track. I'm just keeping you in the know, keeping you aware of what you said you wanted to do, and then being able to assist you along those lines.
And you talked earlier about losing your sister and not being able to talk about it because of the stigmatism that was surrounding
Mm-hmm.
that. Do you feel like within doing this work, you're trying to make sure that other people don't have to go through that as well, that they're able to be able to share their pain openly, to share their experiences openly, without worrying about like the stigma and trauma of sharing their story?
Um, I can't relate that. I can't say that it's like particularly. I don't want people to go through that. I think there's something about being able to go through everything in life, but then also being able to find support.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, so to speak. But I think everybody's here to go through their experiences. But now after, it's like, how can people be there for people in those experiences? When I look back and say, um, that was all negative. There was loss. There was definitely loss there. But at the same time, um, I think it was an experience that gave me reference to be able to do some of the stuff I'm doing now. To understand that there are ways to actually identify things or talk to each other, or provide that space for people to talk with someone.
My friend said, "What doesn't kill you sends you to therapy," and so
if you can afford therapy,
yeah. But that's some
yeah.
of the. I think it's like really important to say people do not always have means to like a traditional therapist
Mm-hmm.
because it's expensive, or just like they're working multiple jobs, so they don't have like the literal time to sit down and talk to someone professionally. But you talked about building the support like ecosystems for folks.
Mm-hmm.
What does your support ecosystem look like?
Mine specifically, for myself. Hmm. My support system for myself is, I think, people I work with, my family, um, and then space. So if I'm feeling overwhelmed, if I'm feeling angry, then you want to take your space. You want to make sure that you're not endangering yourself or endangering others. Um, so I think that's my support group. I think the people I work with, I love working with people in my family. I love talking to them. And I think my being honest, as I see, is therapy. So if you can be honest with people around you, you can be honest with yourself about what you're dealing with, that's, to me, that's therapeutic. So that if you find yourself lying a lot, and I'm not saying I don't lie, um, but if you find yourself lying a lot, that means you're covering things up, you're not being who you are, and nobody really knows what's going on in your life. They have no way to figure out how to help you. They have no way to support you because you're keeping everything bottled up. So I think it took me a long time to go like full circle, which is, okay, cool. Let me just talk about my problems. A friend of mine was like, hey, I think sometimes you shared a little bit too much of your relationship or this, and I'm like, well, I don't go to therapy, so I'm just gonna talk about what I'm talking about, and unless I'm talking to police, feds, or something like that, I shouldn't really have to worry about that. No one's trying to find me and kill me. So, you know, I think I'm okay. But so much leverage someone has with the truth, unless it's to incarcerate you or kill you, Other than that, I think if you're being upfront, you should be able to deal with whatever it is. And people have a hard time leveraging truth with you if you're willing to accept the truth itself. So that's how I just kind of check in, like, what am I doing? Okay, if I'm catching myself doing a bunch of things that don't fall in my principles, that means I'm probably fucking up somewhere else. Excuse me.
Okay, and so when you do that check-in with yourself, you get what is your support system. What is your realignment process like? Okay, you said you're not going to therapy. You have like friends that you're bouncing, family you're bouncing ideas off of. So like when you go back, it's okay. I gotta make some tune-ups. What is that process like for you?
Shit, I would say sometimes a tune-up is a haircut. This is therapeutic right here, like having this conversation, being willing to have this conversation with you. Um, you're like, no, I don't send you the questions ahead of time. So it's like right there. I say, okay, this is gonna be therapeutic. And then I think if you work out, walk is extremely therapeutic for me. Um, if you can go into a gym, if you can find something like physical that you can do, you can get certain things out. So I think those are my check-ins. I like playing pool now.
Okay.
And so I think that's it. And then like telling jokes is really like my therapy. Like sitting around with people laughing about certain things, joking on each other, or just telling jokes in general. I think that's my therapy.
And so, like, as you're doing these walks, do you ever think about what you want, like, the next 4 or 5 years to look like for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I believe I think about that like once a week.
Okay.
Without necessarily having the full plan laid out. I think I always kind of project into the future of things, but not looking at it as a business. Just looking at it where you want to be, uh, mentally and spiritually. I think in that instance, like I know where I want to be as um, in my late years. You don't want to be angry, crabby, feeling like you didn't do what you wanted to do. You want to actually be able to say, I can have some legacy. I've done some good work in the world, even if no one knows about it. And if I pass, I'm not passing with a bunch of angst. I'm not passing with a bunch of negativity. So I can see it as like that's the way I look at it. Is like where do I want to be mentally, physically, spiritually, and then work-wise, I would think in the work, everything has changed in the last 3 months just with this new political era. So I think it's like got the nonprofit world spun up. It's got everything from union workers, to people dealing with immigration and visas, and everybody. I think that is not in the 1% is a target. So you want to think about how, not necessarily think about like the oppression. You want to think about the collaboration. So I want to think about how can we collaborate more in local levels and then in the larger levels to actually keep moving forward. So I think, at this point, I'm hoping we don't go into another era like the crack era with fentanyl and maybe the next synthetic drug that pops up. or that is it's probably out now, but it will end up in the drug supply in its other way. And so I'm hoping that we don't have a loss of a bunch of black and brown people to prisons and incarceration because now all of a sudden, there's a little bit of fentanyl in a pill that they're selling that they didn't even know had it. So I think that's the real jeopardy is like, the way it was before, where if you got caught with 5 grams of crack as opposed to 500 grams of powder, there was a different sentencing. So, I'm worrying about people that are selling pills or selling certain things that are going to be demonized and incarcerated for years or been given homicide charges because they provided somebody with a pill that they didn't know had fentanyl in it. I think that potentially is a little scary future for me. But I think if the work that we're doing to be preemptive, it's not just about like substance users using test kits, but it's also about vendors and providers using test kits, and testing their thing in the supply chain to make sure everything is safe. So I think that's part of it.
Well, I hope your future is filled with collaboration and community, not so much mass incarceration. And Daryl, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Okay.
And that has been this edition of Brunch with the Black Man.